Why, thank you, Paige, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in our webinar, Reserve Studies 102, the financial analysis. A number of people have tell me that they have a good understanding of what the reserve component list is, the physical things there at their association, but they wonder, how do we get that other information together and what's its meaning? How do they get a grasp on it to help move their association forward successfully into the future? And it's all a bunch of simple calculations. The way we're able to take your long component list and turn it into useful information that tells you if your reserve fund is strong or weak, basically how your reserve fund is now, and then how successfully to get to the future from where you're starting at, which is what is the appropriate reserve contribution rate. How large should our reserve contributions be for your association? So in today's session, I'll take you through that process, showing you the magic of how it all comes together. Now, as Paige indicated earlier, the course is now approved for CE credit through CAM ICB. And those of you who indicated in the registration process that you were CMCA certified will receive a certificate of completion within a week. Now, just for a few housekeeping things, this is a live presentation. We've muted everyone to keep the background noise from everyone across the country from interrupting what's going on here, but periodically I'll ask for hands raised for your input or to make sure you're with me, and that's what that little hand icon is on your control panel. It's likely off to the right. And similarly, Paige indicated that some people have already emailed in some questions. If you have a question that pops into your mind or comes to mind during the session, by all means type it in the dialog box, and that's the list that Paige will draw from during our Q&A time at the end of the session today. I hope that you've come here expecting to learn, looking forward to finding out what is that key piece of information, another hint, another grasp, another gem, hopefully, that'll help you on that step towards a solution at your association, trying to run your community effectively and efficiently. Well, we're going to record this session, and it should be available next week on our website. And in addition, if you take a couple minutes at the end of today's session to fill out our little survey, how did we do, what did you find interesting, not only will that help shape future presentations, but an outline of today's session will be emailed to everyone who takes those couple of minutes. So a good investment of your time. So we are ready to get going. The question is, what am I trying to do for you here? Why am I doing this session, and why are you attending? And I want to emphasize, it's not to teach you about reserve studies, because there's plenty of ways to learn about reserve studies. What I'm here to help you with today is to help you in your job as a manager or board member, how to achieve your objective. Now, my objective is doing reserve studies. Your objective is to preserve, protect, maintain, enhance the assets of the corporation. And I believe a reserve study is a very effective tool in your hands if you know what it is and if you know how to use it. So that's the objective today, to get a tool into your hands that will help you in your job to protect, maintain, enhance, preserve the assets of the corporation. So from that, give me a hands raised if you're ready for me to jump in the presentation. Okay, everyone, grab your mouse, give me a click on the hands raised. Very nice. Okay, thanks. I'm going to put hands down, and here we go. All right. It all starts out with the reserve component list. That's the reflection of the physical assets there at the association. The things that the association is physically responsible for, and that forms the foundation for all the work that we do from that point on. We talked about that in our Reserve Studies 101 session. In that session, we addressed the subject of creating, updating, and reviewing, if someone else did it, your reserve component list. And in case you missed it, that's a great foundational piece of information. You can see it on our website. Go to reservestudy.com, Learning Center, Webinars, and alphabetically, I think it's actually near the top, Reserve Studies 101. Not only the webinar, but the handout, the outline that's attached to that. It's a great piece of information. And that's a good foundational document for managers and board members to have and share. After you've got that component list, then the question is, well, now that we know what we're responsible to maintain, do we have enough money, and how much should we be setting aside? Well, those are the next two questions. The do we have enough money is the calculation or evaluation of reserve fund strength. It reveals how well the size of your reserve fund balance matches up against the needs that are defined by the components. Then comes the calculation of the reserve funding plan, which reveals how much it's going to cost on an ongoing basis to offset the ongoing deterioration of your components, providing, and here's the result, for the timely repair and replacement of your reserve components. And I might refer to that as a successful future. And from your point of view, that's preserving, protecting, maintaining, enhancing the assets of the corporation, having the funds necessary to do your job. Now let me point out that what reserve fund strength and the reserve funding plan have in common is that they're both calculated results. And so that's the material we'll be covering here in today's webinar, the calculations that help you know, do we have enough cash, and based on how much we have now, how much do we need to be setting aside on an ongoing basis. Well, the good news is that these concepts, these calculations, come from National Reserve Study standards, and they apply to all associations. They apply to the large, fancy high-rises, the very simple and maybe even small neighborhood townhomes, the non-standard associations like this dockondominium, where literally people own docks, just like they would own a unit in the, and you can see it in the background, units in the adjacent condominium association, or maybe just a large condominium association with a long list of components. It applies to all associations, and so it's going to be a very effective tool as if you're a portfolio manager in all the associations you manage. If you're a board member, understanding that this is an issue in terms not just unique to your association. It's a great tool as you're running the business of running the association. And going back to a quick reminder, the National Reserve Study Standards gives us a nice four-part test to define the appropriate things to include in your reserve component list. And very quickly, it's things, assets that are a common area maintenance responsibility with a limited useful life, with a predictable remaining useful life, and above a minimum cost. That's the national standard four-part test that gives you the component list, which looks something like this. So this is the sample component list that I'll be working with for today's webinar. A description of each component, what it is, and the project that you'll be doing with it, the useful life, which is UL, measured in years, remaining useful life, RUL, and the current cost of the asset, the cost to repair or replace. So that's the information that we're gathering. That's the component list. And now what do we do? How do we get a reliable measuring system out of that that says, well, is what we have enough money? So we come again to National Reserve Study standards. Let's look at how much is enough, okay? A lot of people ask this, and they may think, well, is it dollars per unit? Is it dollar per year? Percent of the annual budget, or is a certain hard figure? That's not going to give you the guidance you want, because if you go back momentarily, I showed pictures of different associations, and you can imagine that a $500,000 balance is going to mean a whole lot difference between a 10-unit condo and a 200-unit twin tower high-rise. And so we're looking for something that is nice and consistent, and the great thing is that we've found it. Something that applies to all different types of associations and is consistent. So let me walk you through how it works. First component, that pool furniture. Simple asset. Well, it's going to last a few years, minor use and abuse, time in the sun, 5 years useful life, and a 0 remaining useful life. So that means replace it now. Give me hands raised, everyone. Replace it now with a remaining useful life of 0. Hands raised. Very good. Exactly. With a remaining useful life of 0, it's time to replace it now. I'm going to put everyone's hands down. Okay, so with a $4,600 current replacement cost, they should have how much money? Think about it. Exactly. They should have $4,600 on hand for the timely repair and replacement of this asset. Okay, let's go to component number 2, a slightly different example. The pool resurfacing, a 10-year useful life, 5 years remaining useful life. If its current cost to resurface is $10,000, and think about it, if the asset is halfway used up, how much do you think would be a good number to have on hand? Ready? Yeah, $5,000. So if the asset is halfway used up, it would be reasonable to expect that you'd have half the cash on hand. And that's all we're talking about here. Mathematically, the National Reserve Study standard calculation is the fractional age of the asset times the current cost. So like for the pool resurface, it was 5/10 times the current cost, and that gives you the value. You do this for all the components, and what you're going to get is a consistent, for each component, moving scale. That's why the calculations you do this year are going to be different from the calculations you do next year, and the year after, and the year after, and you're going to get a big jump on the year after a big project, after you've done the roofing, after you've done the painting. So it's just a proportional growth of how much cash you should have on hand for each component. Do the project, and it cycles back again. So do this calculation for all the components. You can see the first 2 that we've already done. Do the same thing for the remaining, and it would seem reasonable by extension that this association would have a little over $154,000 on hand at this point in time. And I think you just saw that next year that number is going to be different. It's going to go up or down depending on how the projects cycle through. And that'll give us some information that now we can finally compare to the actual reserves you have on hand. So we've learned what the fully funded balance is. That's the amount of accumulated deterioration of your reserve components. And you compare your actual cash to that. Divide by the fully funded balance, you get a proportion, multiplied by 100 to get the percentage, and all of a sudden now you've got something that you can use in comparison last year to this year, our association to another association, big associations to small associations. Now you have something of value. Now you can look at the other board members and say, well, we have at this point in time $308,000. That means we are 200% funded, and that means something. I'll get to that in just a moment, and that's very different from we have $15,460. We are 10% funded. Now the good thing is that 10% funded at Association A means the same thing as 10% funded in Association B. So now we have a good measuring system that we can use across the board. You can make informed budget decisions. These associations down here need to be strengthening their reserves, and this association here has a surplus so they can start to bleed off or diminish. And we get to the question, or it answers the question, has our reserve fund balance kept pace with the expenses at our association? So this is what we're talking about here. This association has $154,000, 100 of deterioration. They can measure their actual cash to it and see, has their cash in reserves kept pace with the ongoing deterioration. So it's a great way to be able to measure how are we doing, and are we close to the pace line, are we close to having enough money, or are we way off? National Reserve Study Standards gives us this scale. And the ideal point is right on the 100% line, and that is in the middle of what we call the good range or the strong range, anywhere from 70 to 130. Going below that, the 30 to 70% range is the fair, where reserve fund strength is in that middle range, and the poor range is 0 to 30%. So if your reserves are 10% funded, you're down here. If your reserves are 75, you're up here. And as we asked in the question at the beginning of the program, if your reserves are 50, I think it was 52% funded, you're in this middle range. And what we've learned over doing literally thousands of reserve days across the country is this. If you're wondering where do we fit in comparison to others, about 30% of all associations are in that strong green range. About 30% of associations are at or above 70% funded, and that's fantastic. The largest block of associations happen to be in that 30 to 70% middle fair range. That's about 40% of all associations. And the ones that make all the news are the ones that are severely underfunded. About 30% of all associations are in that red zone. These are the ones that are primarily making the news because they're the ones with all the trouble. And remember, it's trouble based on board decisions. That years after year after year after underfunding got them to this situation. So what do we learn? Add the 30% of severely underfunded to the 40% that are fair, gives us 70% are underfunded. And of course, 30% of those are seriously underfunded, and 30% are well-funded. So that's, in summary, what the marketplace looks like. That's my client base. That's your neighbors. If you're a manager, that's the portfolio of associations at your management company. 30% are well-funded, and 30% are associations with some severe problems. And the reason why we care is this chart. In the 0 to 30% range, you have those associations experience a significant risk of special assessment. Basically, special assessments, to no surprise, are relatively frequent in those associations. And the opposite is true out here above 70% funded. It's basically just kind of background noise. And you start to see it creeping up in the fair zone. The weaker the reserve fund gets, the higher the risk of special assessment. Nothing that's surprising, but here's the numbers. These are the consequences and the very real risks that boards face in setting their budget and deciding what's going to happen at our association. So it's a risk analysis where the board gets to decide, do we spend a little bit of money on ourselves, offsetting ongoing deterioration and inviting less risk of special assessment, which means you have a better chance of preserving, protecting, maintaining the assets of the association, your primary job, doing things on time, or do you take some short-term benefits? Do you lower your reserve contributions? And of course that brings the risk of not having enough cash to be able to do your projects on time. Again, why do we care? Well, when you have a low reserve fund, weak reserve fund, 0 to 30%, high incidence of special assessments, deferred maintenance, declining home values, mortgage difficulties, increased board liability, and of course you can presume tenseness at anxiety at board meetings, committee meetings, annual meetings, tension, longer meetings, just a lot of bad things going on. But if underfunding is so foolish, why do so many associations do it? It's kind of a human nature thing, a short-term gratification. We have a webinar that explains that. It's again on our website under Learning Center, then webinars. You can see some of the issues and some of the phrases you can use, some of the tactics, or I should say strategies you can use to strengthen reserves at your association if yours is currently an unfunded or underfunded association. And how to resolve it? We have a great article in our blog area. We call it the $10 solution. Basically, it's gaining an understanding that it probably took a decade or maybe 2, sometimes even 3 decades to get to where you are now in that underfunded situation. So don't expect to have an overnight culture change. It may take a while, and we call that the $10 solution. Increase your reserve contributions $10 per month per owner this year. Then do it again next year. Then do it again. I think you'll find that in 3, 4, 5 years, most associations can be appropriately funding their reserves in just 3, 4, 5 years of going down this path. It's very short healing time to what was likely a very long process of getting to the problem situation that the association currently finds itself in. Okay, so we're going to move on to the topic of how do we get successfully to the future, moving to the appropriate response. What is the amount of money that we should be setting aside based on our component list and based on our starting point, where we are at this point in time? For many associations, it seems like it's a whole lot of money. It's going to be just a wheelbarrow full, a lot, and just how are we going to do that? Well, yes and no. Reserve expenses are large, and there's nothing you can do. There's no magic wand that I know of that can allow you to stall those reserve expenses. So how are we going to prepare for them? Well, it's that process of preparing on an ongoing basis and doing the responsible thing. So let me walk you through that. It's a little more difficult when you realize that, remember, the deterioration is steady and ongoing, but the result of that is a very irregular set of expenses, and the association needs to get ready to absorb these heavy blows of those big expense years. How does that happen? You've got this irregular expenses and the stable income. Well, that happens when you set the reserve contributions at an appropriate rate, so you're collecting a stable amount of income over time. And I want to take a quick side note here before I get too far on this topic. The percent funded calculations that we talked about just 5, maybe 10 minutes ago as I look at my clock, those are a very specific set of calculations that help us to evaluate reserve fund size. How strong is our reserve fund at this time? Now we're going to talk about the funding. How much money we pour into the reserve account going to make a difference on reserve fund strength in the future? It's a different set of calculations. One is about now, is our reserve fund strong or weak? And these are the funding plan calculations. How are we going to get to the future? Okay, and let me be careful about that. I'm going to ask a question here. It's going to make a difference in some of the words you choose. Are reserves for the here and now, or are reserves for the future? Let me ask this. Are reserves for the here and now? Give me a hands raised if reserves are for the here and now. I'll look around and basically crickets. Just a couple of people. That's fine. I'm going to put hands down. I'm going to propose a new way of thinking. And that new way of thinking is that reserves are for the here and now, because it's human nature that if something is for the future, then it's a little easier, maybe even a lot easier for you to delay and let it be someone else's problem. Those expenses that I showed you just a chart before, boy, they're big expenses, they're way off in the future, but let me change that sentence. The bills may be in the future, that roof bill, that asphalt bill, that painting bill, but the cost is ongoing, daily, weekly, monthly, ongoing deterioration. So if you can offset ongoing deterioration, then the future is going to take care of itself. So in the words you choose, working with either your other board members or the associations that you manage, don't characterize reserves as for the future or saving for a rainy day. Characterize reserves as literally the cost of offsetting the ongoing deterioration. You're going to have a whole lot more success at your association if you frame the discussion in that manner. It's an ongoing bill. That deterioration occurs every month, just as real as any other bill at the association. And if you don't pay that bill of deterioration, it's going to accumulate, and those turn into special assessments. Okay, so what's the cost of deterioration? I'm going to do a slightly different set of calculations here. As you can see, or let me tell you, what I've done is take the cost dividing by the useful life, and I get a deterioration rate. So I do that. Each one, the easy one to see is $10,000 divided by 10 years, get $1,000 a year. The assets at this association are deteriorating at the rate of about 20,000, call it 20,000 a year. Fair enough? That's what we know. So let's move from this. That's a key number to keep in mind, and that's something that we can call maybe the contribution paceline or the speedometer. How fast are we going? How are we catching up? Are we falling behind? Think of this as what are now our contributions are going to be compared to. A few moments ago I talked about the reserve fund balance. This is now the contribution paceline. Okay, let's show this on a chart. I'm going to use this chart for the next few slides. I will plot reserve fund strength over time. Time moves from left to right. And as I indicated earlier, strong reserve fund is over 70%. Weak reserve fund is in this pink 0 to 30% range. Let's start out with an association in about the 50% range. And I've got this yellow arrow here just to help you keep your eyeball on the 100% point. Okay, let me show. If an association starts at the middle range, and if they're contributing at a rate that offsets ongoing deterioration, their reserve fund strength is going to bump up and down a little bit depending on the expenses at the association, but it should remain somewhat stable, about in that same range. Their reserves are what they are. They're fair. They're offsetting ongoing deterioration, and it's going to bump a little bit but not have a net effect. Yet, if you step on the gas, if you start contributing a little bit more than the rate of deterioration, you're going to start catching up. If you were in that pool and you found yourself behind, this means swimming a little bit faster, putting a little more than the rate of deterioration aside. And on the flip side, if you're contributing less than the rate at which your assets are deteriorating, your reserves are going to decrease in strength. Everyone getting that concept? Let me get hands raised if you're with me. If you're contributing more than your rate of deterioration, you're going to strengthen. If you're contributing less than your rate of deterioration, your reserves are going to fall. They're going to weaken. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to put hands down. So that's how what you're doing is going to affect your own future. And the magic is in getting it just right. Now, the difference between right on keeping pace with deterioration and knowing that, oh, we should be doing a little bit of catching up, or we're a little surplus, we can be subsidizing our reserves a little bit, or subsidizing our contributions a little bit with our reserve fund. That's just usually a minor tweak. I don't want to give you the impression that's a big swing, but the value of a reserve study is helping you know what is the right number for us, something that will help you achieve your objective of preserving, protecting, maintaining, enhancing the assets of the association. What's that going to cost? So what does it cost? Well, we find that reserve contributions are typically 15 to 40% of an association's total budget. That's kind of a wide range. Another value of the reserve study is telling you where you are in that range. Average numbers are usually about in the 25% fraction. So if you're comfortable with pie charts, reserve contributions may look like a wheelbarrow again, a lot of money, but you've got assets there at the association that frankly are deteriorating, and that cost of deterioration needs to be offset, or again, you're just heading yourself to a financial problem in the future. But I want to make it clear that even though we talked about a wheelbarrow full of money, I want to bring some reality, and that reality is while reserve contributions may be a big number, thousands of dollars per month for your association or per year, when you divide it down to monthly to the individual homeowners, it's very affordable. And I want to say that again, reserve contributions are very affordable. When people tell me they can't afford reserve contributions, I look them in the eye and I say, I don't believe that they are too expensive for you, because reserve contributions for the average condo owner are about the cost of a premium coffee per day. And based on how many premium coffees, $3, $4, $5 per day, are being sold across the country, generally we Americans can afford that. So reserve contributions are not too expensive. And it gets down to trivial numbers when you talk about homeowner associations where the association doesn't maintain the residential buildings, a planned development, thing like that. Dealing with one on my desk right now where the reserve contributions are going to end up being a couple $1,000s per month. I'm doing this on my calculator here. A couple thousand divided by 246 owners is $8, a little over $8 per month, divided by 30 days per month. We're talking 27 cents a day. You can't convince me that reserve contributions are too expensive when we're down in the few dollars or cents per day range. And that may be something you need to have a heart-to-heart with your homeowners about. Okay, we have been talking about National Reserve Study standard concepts, and there's a few others concepts that I want to just touch on. Full funding, threshold funding, baseline funding, those are funding strategies. And there's some other methodology issues. Methodologies that we use in our industry are things like cash flow method or pooling, or straight line method or component method. Those are different tools that we use, and the consequences of that. We're going to have a webinar where we spend the whole time talking about those kind of issues coming up in fall here of 2016. So stay tuned. If you haven't signed up for our email list, make sure that you've done that, and you'll get the announcement for that webinar coming up. See where we at. We are in summertime now. I think it'll be September, October, something like that. But coming up in the future, we'll be able to spend some time on those topics. The deal is that we've had a lot of training, we've had a lot of experience, and we deal with these tools day in, day out with literally thousands of associations. And so we've been back and forth down this trail many times. We've helped thousands of associations get successfully to the future, preserving, protecting, maintaining, enhancing the assets of the association, guiding them so that when it comes down to a board meeting, they know what their numbers are. They've got their hands on the wheel, they know what the needs are of the association, and some talking points, some particular words, some strategies that they can use in helping bring the owners along so that they can get their association, if not in the very near future, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, to a successful future. Well, looking at the time, it really is time to wrap up. We have a deep set of resources on our website, reservestudy.com. If you go into the Learning Center, and if you realize that you don't know what your numbers are and you want some help, by all means, we'd love to help. That's what we're in the business of doing. Our webinars are free. What we do is help our association clients with actual reserve studies, and you can also see a link on the right-hand side to click and join our email list. And it's now at this point in time that I'll turn the microphone over to Paige, and she will serve as MC and host for the Q&A portion of our session. So Paige, it's all yours.